Now, the Supreme Court is going to overturn this unconstitutional guilty verdict for the following reasons. Number one, and hit subscribe, you will hear from the FEC chairman explaining why it's unconstitutional and why the Supreme Court, hopefully before July 11th, will overturn this absurd, unconstitutional, guilty verdict. You'll hear from the FEC, you'll hear from legal scholars, and I'm going to show you right now in the next 30 seconds exactly why, ladies and gentlemen, it is unconstitutional. Hit subscribe, and you are going to also hear from federal government officials. Trump found guilty. Read the court transcript of the hush money trial's final day. There is no federal crime here. A state cannot level a federal charge, which is why it's unconstitutional and why the justices, I believe, have already decided. The individuals on the Supreme Court, the conservative justices, have already decided that when they get the case, they're going to overturn on basic unconstitutional grounds. You cannot have a state level a federal charge when the FEC dropped the case. So the FEC already dropped the case. The federal government dropped the case. There was no federal statute. If you don't believe me, right here, you can go to the jury deliberations. You can go and search for the federal statute. So just type in federal, the word federal. There are no federal statutes. Okay? There's a New York penal code that they cite. Okay, several. But there's no federal statute. Game, set, match. You will not find, even in the jury deliberation, you can go and read the transcript of the trial's final day. There is no federal crime that he committed. There's no federal crime that he committed. Okay? The guilty verdict, ladies and gentlemen, did not have an actual federal statute that Trump broke. Okay, Trump found guilty. Read court transcripts. When you hit the jury court transcript right here on the final day, you can do a word search. It says that Michael Cohen pleaded guilty, therefore Trump is guilty of a federal crime. It cites the federal statutes that Michael Cohen pleaded guilty to. That's completely irrelevant. He could have pled guilty to a million different things. You'd still have to prove that Trump broke the statute. And he didn't, because the FEC dropped the case. And you are going to hear now from the FEC itself, former FEC Federal Election Commission Chairman Hanze von Spakovsky, Bradley Smith, and others state that there was no federal crime. It's unconstitutional. A state cannot level a federal crime at an individual. And the whole thing is the most blatant and overt unconstitutional guilty verdict, and it's going to be overturned. But here's Hanze von Spakovsky explaining from the Heritage Foundation. Hit subscribe to the Heritage Foundation's YouTube channel. This is Hanze von Spakovsky, one of his many times explaining to the world there was no federal crime. A state cannot level a federal crime at an individual. The federal government, the Federal Election Commission in this case, you have to find a federal statute, an FEC statute that Trump broke. And he didn't break a statute, as you can hear.
Hans von Spakovsky is a senior legal fellow at Heritage Foundation and a former Department of Justice official under President George W. Bush. He believes Cohen did not violate campaign finance laws, and neither did the president. He joins me now. Hans, this is a really hot article. Rudy's been forwarding it. The president's been waving it around in the air. I've been talking about it on the 5 all week. I claim all the credit. Besides you, of course, for writing it. In simple terms, because we're going to be talking about this probably for the next 2 years, was this payment to Stormy Daniels illegal before the election? You say the Federal Election Commission, the Federal Election Campaign Act would say no, it's perfectly legal.
Yeah, and the reason is this. You can't use campaign funds to pay personal or business expenses. You can only use campaign funds to pay campaign-related expenses.
Right.
And the FEC has said in the past that this kind of a payment, a hush money payment, that's a personal expense. That's not related to your campaign.
And it was actually
look,
paid for by Trump, not the campaign.
No, that's right. And the reason we know that the FEC would not consider this to be a campaign-related expense, and that's important because if it's not, then all the rules and regulations in federal law don't apply. But remember, the Justice Department tried to actually make this same argument once before when they prosecuted or tried to prosecute John Edwards.
Right.
Their actual contributors were making payments to his mistress who was working for the campaign.
Right.
A jury didn't buy it, but the FEC also didn't. They audited the Edwards campaign and said, these are not campaign-related expenses.
Right. Now, so let's just put this into perspective now. If you're in Congress, and we know Congress has this slush fund, which pays out sexual harassment, sexual misconduct settlements that, you know, require people to hush up afterwards. They run for re-election every 2 years. I mean, it's in the window of a campaign, of course. Millions of dollars is going out. That's taxpayer money. That's not being reported on FEC filings. So what's the difference?
No. No, in fact, if you take to the extreme this weird theory that the U.S. Attorney in New York has, yeah, all these members of Congress are using taxpayer funds to pay for campaign-related expenses, which I think is very problematic.
I mean, if you just give that argument right there, it's game over. I just don't see how people, because everybody on the left is saying, oh, you know.
That's why you can't find the federal statute, the FEC statute that New York convicted him on. And New York cannot, just like Colorado cannot, utilize a federal law against Trump, a federal law that hasn't been leveled against Trump by the FEC or the DOJ.
What? He pled to a campaign finance violation. That's it. The president's now on the hook, and let's impeach. You're saying you don't see any evidence in the case histories and these acts. I mean, you have codes here you cite, and I want everybody to read this article by Hans. Trump's ex-lawyer didn't violate campaign finance laws, and neither did the president. It's all over the internet. You can't even spend money. I mean, what if you got a haircut before the election? I mean, out of your personal wallet. I mean, is that a campaign expense if you don't report it?
Well, look, under that theory it is. I mean, I'll give you another quick example. Look, if you don't pay the mortgage payments on your house and a bank forecloses in the middle of your campaign, obviously that's going to hurt your reputation and may influence the outcome of the election. But that's still not a campaign-related expense. That's something you have to pay out of your own funds. You can't use campaign money to do it. And by the way, if, in fact, a candidate were to use campaign funds to pay off, for example, a mistress, I can guarantee you that FEC would be going after them saying, you use campaign funds for personal expenses.
Right. All right, Hans, there it is. I suggest every Democrat in the country read this article.
So Hans A. von Spakovsky wrote in the Heritage Foundation and subscribed to their YouTube channel that it is not a campaign finance issue. It is absolutely not. There was no statute, there was no federal statute that he broke. That's why the Supreme Court has already decided, in my view, the individuals at the conservatives in the Supreme Court know it's going to get to the Supreme Court before November 5th, hopefully before July 11th. They already know what they're going to rule on it, just like it was a unanimous Supreme Court decision. I told you it would be unanimous overturning the absurd Colorado ban. Go and look, the jury deliberation. You can, this is a USA Today article, okay? Trump found guilty. Well, what did he find guilty? What was he found guilty of? You can go ahead and click on read Trump trial transcript, guilty verdict proceedings. Go ahead and then do a word search. You can type in the word federal, okay? You will get pled guilty to violating 11 FEC acts, 11 FEC crimes. Cohen pled guilty. Trump did not plead guilty, and Trump was not fined. The FEC fined Clinton and the DNC. Who cares if Cohen pled guilty? What a vapid, absurd, stupid political stunt. Who cares if Cohen pled guilty? Of course he was going to plead guilty. He withheld $3 to $4 million from the IRS. He had taxi medallions and bank fraud that could have given him years and years and years and years behind bars. So he played ball politically. So he pled guilty. But there's not one FEC statute that was utilized. You can read here the Code of Regulations, the FEC Code of Regulations right here. Okay? You can look. Not one of these statutes was Trump guilty of. Not one of these statutes. They used 11 statutes that Cohen pled guilty pled guilty to breaking. Okay, but that's Michael Cohen. The FEC never even leveled a statute at Cohen or Trump. They didn't even fine Cohen or Trump. They fined Clinton and the DNC for purchasing the Steele dossier. None of these statutes, and I can't find the actual specific statute because they just state in the jury deliberations, well, they pled guilty to 11 of them. We don't know which ones. I don't know which ones. We don't know which specific statute, but let's go ahead and it's going to get to the Supreme Court. Greg Jarrett is going to explain this right now. Hit subscribe if you're new.
They know it's a hoax. They know it's a hoax. They get it. You know, they're really smart, and it's really something. So we're going to be appealing this scam. We're going to be appealing it on many different things. He wouldn't allow us to have witnesses. He wouldn't allow us to talk. He wouldn't allow us to do anything. The judge was a tyrant.
That was former President Trump vowing to appeal his conviction following his unprecedented trial in New York.
Sentencing is now scheduled for July 11th, just days before the Republican National Convention. So how long will the legal battle last, and how will it impact Trump's campaign?
Fox News legal analyst Greg Jarrett joins us now. Greg, you've been helping us through this process. Confusing. I still don't understand what the charges are or how it was concocted, but we'll
That's because there's no federal crime. There's no federal statute. And that's very, very, very important. Again, before we get to Greg Jarrett, you can read the jury deliberations. There's no specific federal statute. They talk about FEC crimes numerous times, but they don't list specific statutes. Unless I'm reading it wrong, and I don't think I'm reading it wrong. Okay, you can look right here. Here, under federal, they speak in very broad and vague terms. Under federal law, then why didn't the FEC get involved? Under federal law, right here, you can say, one violations of the Federal Election Commission Act. Wait, Campaign Act. Where's the statute? Where's the statute? There's no statute that they used. There's no statute. They used the New York Penal Code pertaining to record keeping. They did not use a federal statute. I mean, it's right there for the world to see. This is blatantly unconstitutional. And the justices know this. It'll get to the Supreme Court. Greg Jarrett will talk about that.
leave that for another day. What does happen next? How in the world does this play out in an appeals context?
Well, the word speedy, Pete, is not in the vocabulary of the New York Court of Appeals. I mean, you can't even file an appeal until after the sentencing, as you point out, July 11th. Even then, I mean, the next level appellate division is really a rubber stamp for Judge Juan Merchan. Same thing with the highest court, which means that Trump's only real relief in this case can be found in the federal courts, because those judges, who are a lot smarter, actually care about the right to a fair trial. And in this case, it's littered with reversible errors by Judge Merchan, especially due process violations.
There's no way that President Trump's legal team is going to get the Court of Appeals before July 11th or before November 5th to overturn this. And they want Trump in jail. They want the public relations victory, the sad, pathetic, Pyrrhic victory, the momentary victory of seeing Trump in jail for something he didn't do while they commit crimes with laptops full of bribery and graft, linked to the current president mashed potato brains, and top secret intelligence on servers, which is impossible to transfer from a cybersecurity perspective and blatantly illegal to do so. But, they actually do commit crimes. See, if Trump had private servers and laptops full of graft, I wouldn't vote for him. Democrats don't care either way. They will vote for a Democrat no matter what. That is the definition of a cult, but let's continue.
Refusing to tell the defendant what this secondary conspiracy crime is, that ignores Trump's Sixth Amendment right. And then telling the jury, don't worry about unanimity on which of the three possible uncharged crimes that are a predicate to your verdict. I mean, that is so shocking, such a bedrock constitutional right. But the legal theory itself was ludicrous. As you say, nobody really knows what they decided other than the verdict, an expired misdemeanor that comes to life thanks to an unidentified felony over which Alvin Bragg has no authority to enforce. As I said in a column, this was an Alice in Wonderland case with a Mad Hatter judge.
Yeah.
Greg, let me ask you two quick questions if I could.
Nobody knows the federal statute. That's why you hit subscribe to this channel if you're new. You might say I'm a one-trick pony, but that's fine. I've been right about the Colorado ban. I said that it would be overturned, unanimously. I've been spot on, thank God, on most of the things I talk about on this channel, okay? The Supreme Court getting involved is the most important issue facing American politics before November 5th. Supreme Court has to get involved, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, we can look at foreign policy and domestic policy, and Democrats have really tanked this country. It's been an unmitigated disaster on foreign policy and domestic policy. The economy is on the brink of a stock market and crypto crash, all because of Biden's energy policies and economic policies and foreign policy. But the Supreme Court must get involved. There's no federal statute. You could look at the jury deliberation last day right here. You want to read the transcript? Read the transcript. Do a word search. Look for statutes. They cite New York State Penal Code statutes. They do not cite anything listed in the Code of Federal Regulations for the FEC. Okay, this is the FEC. This is from the FEC website. Okay, you can look right here. Federal Election Commission. And you can legal resource regulations. And then you can get all the regulations, okay, from the Federal Election Commission. There's not one that he was ever convicted of by the FEC or the DOJ. There's a reason that they won't tell Trump which statute that he broke, because it's an imaginary, invisible statute. They made it up. It's blatantly unconstitutional.
You point out his only real relief would come in the federal system. No chance in the state system, you would assume, in New York. But even in the appellate system, Greg, I would be very skeptical he'd find relief in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. It really wouldn't come, I would think, before the Supreme Court of the United States. Unless he gets relief at the Supreme Court, I can't see where it will come.
Yeah, I think he has a pretty good chance in the lower appellate federal courts. But you're right. Well, ultimately, this could go to the U.S. Supreme Court. I think they would look very dimly at the actions of Judge Juan Merchan. Fair trial and a venue of his peers. That didn't happen here. And as I pointed out, these due process rights are so important and they were so egregiously violated. I can't see this case surviving judicial scrutiny in the federal courts.
You know, it's interesting. The White House is already trying to lay the groundwork for somehow you're un-American, or maybe it's even taboo to say anything about how this was unfair. They kind of want.
It's the definition of being an American to look at what Democrats did to Trump and say, wow, that's unconstitutional, just like the Colorado ban. Even liberal justices stated the Colorado ban was unconstitutional. Trump got a 9-0 Supreme Court victory, and I said it would be 9-0.
Want to make it like the same way it was with the last election, where, you know, you're an insurrectionist if you suggest that things were not on the up and up. I find that very interesting. But I think the number one question that I've been getting from other people, they seem to think I know the answer. I don't. So I'm going to ask you, which is there a chance that Donald Trump will be either on house arrest or put in jail? I heard David Axelrod talking about this on Bill Maher's show as well. What do you think?
No, I don't think so. First of all,
I love Greg Jarrett. And he's fantastic. I think that 100% they want to jail Trump without a shadow of a doubt, even if, and I think he's going to go and talk about how it's would be absurd, and he's a first-time offender, you know, quote unquote, and you know, in his 70s, and it's a Class E misdemeanor, and Democrats don't care. They want that. They have convinced themselves that Trump is just as criminal and crooked as Hunter and Joe and Hillary and Bill. And so they think that Trump deserves 1,000,000 years in prison. They don't get that they actually commit crimes, nor do they care that they're the ones who actually do commit crimes. So when they say, well, look at what's happening to Hunter. Yeah, that's a specific crime. You're utilizing substances and then, lying on a form. It's a specific crime. It's not just like crimes exist independent of whether or not they help Trump or Biden or Clinton. Okay? So Trump did not commit a crime, yet he was convicted. The Democrats commit crimes all the time, and they get away with it. Well, you know, he's elderly. He had classified data. He couldn't declassify, but a court wouldn't want to convict him. So what Democrats do with the Honorable James Comey, oh, well, you know, no reasonable prosecutor would indict. Of course they commit crimes. Then they say, gee, you know, nobody would really want to indict them. That's how they get out of criminal activity. With Trump, they had to literally fabricate a federal crime. There's no federal crime here. So he didn't commit a crime here. But Hunter did. And so did Joe and Hillary and Bill, almost certainly.
Well, it's almost automatic that you get a stay of any sentence pending an appeal. But in this particular case, it is the lowest level felony. It was actually one crime that they decided to count stack by multiplying the number of invoices and vouchers in the case. That kind of count stacking, no honest, ethical prosecutor would ever do it. No judge who was fair or competent would have allowed it, which, excludes Juan Marchand. As to your other point, I mean, Biden and the Biden.
And by the way, every liberal Democrat is saying this was a wonderful example of the rule of law and how nobody's above the law, and how the court and the judge did a very good job. They were very unbiased. In fact, the judge wanted Trump's team to object. They wanted more objections, and Trump's team wouldn't object. And then he told Trump's team, do you want to object? And you should probably object to this. And you see, so it was so fair. And the same thing happened with the arguments in the Supreme Court. The Colorado lawyers were saying the same thing. Well, Trump had every right to defend himself, and it was overturned 9-0. So in the world of Democrats, it's completely and utterly fair. It's so fair and neutral, and the Mueller probe was fair. Okay? Everything that they do that happens, by virtue of it happening, means that it was just. So that's their warped, distorted, absurd mentality.
Administration saying you can't criticize this decision. This coming from a president who, more than any other president, has trampled on the rights of free speech and has shredded the First Amendment. Remember, this is, Biden was the guy behind the censorship on social media. Of course, I have a right, and everybody else has a right to say this case was rigged, it was preordained, it was not fair. And I don't care how much Joe Biden complains about that. The Constitution protects us in our criticism of this case and this judge.
Yeah.
All right, Greg Jarrett, thank you so much.
Thanks, Greg.
Ladies and gentlemen, I know you're waiting to hear Hans A. von Spakovsky again. And here he is again, Heritage Foundation, Hans A. von Spakovsky, former Federal Election Commission chairman, explaining again, it was not a campaign finance law violation. This is, again, you're going to hear Bradley Smith in a second. This is what makes it unconstitutional. There was no federal law that Trump broke.
Well, a former member of the Federal Election Commission, Hans von Spakovsky, agrees with the president, and he joins us now. Hans, thanks so much for being here.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Set this up for our viewers. What is this campaign finance law, and why do you say Donald Trump did not violate it?
It's called the Federal Election Campaign Act, and it governs the raising of money and the spending of money for all federal campaigns. That's anyone running for Congress or the presidency. Mr. Cohen pleaded guilty to a supposed violation of that law because of payments that were made, I guess you could call them hush money payments, to two women who were claiming that they'd had affairs with the president. The problem with his guilty plea is that those payments aren't covered by the law. The only way these kind of expenses are covered under the law is if they are campaign-related expenses. And these are expenses. This is a potential personal liability of the president, and you actually can't use campaign funds, money that you've raised from campaign contributors, to pay for something like that.
Well, you had mentioned and quoted Federal Election Commission Chairman Brad Smith, who said that these payments to women were unseemly, but they're not necessarily illegal.
Yeah, and that's the key thing for people to keep in mind here. We're talking about what is an actual violation of federal law. And this is not something that the Federal Election Commission, and that's the independent agency that is supposed to enforce this law on a civil basis, and that's where I used to serve as a commissioner, it does not consider that these kind of payments are related to a campaign. Therefore, the rules and regulations don't apply to how that kind of a payment is made.
Do any of Michael Cohen's or the president's actions, Hans, constitute a civil offense?
No, I don't think they do, and they certainly don't constitute a criminal offense. Why? Well, because under the law, to prove a criminal violation of the campaign finance law, you have to prove that it was a knowing and willful violation. You can't prove that when you have former FEC commissioners saying it's not a violation of the law. You have the FEC saying it's not a violation of the law. That raises great doubts about it, and so how can anyone be found to have willfully and knowingly violated the law?
Michael Cohen, he says that this was done to sway the election.
Do you want to know who violated the law? Hillary Clinton's campaign and the DNC. They were actually fined by the FEC for breaking a specific statute, purchasing a Steele dossier with campaign funds.
So doesn't that make it campaign related, Hans?
No, it doesn't. And here's why. There's another provision of the law, and this is something that the U.S. Attorney in New York is essentially ignoring. There's another provision of the law that says that an expenditure or an expense is not campaign related if it's an expense that would exist whether or not you're running for office. And that's why this is not a campaign expense. This is the kind of claim that celebrities of all kinds get fairly often, and it was not dependent on the president running for office. yeah, it might affect his reputation and it might affect the election, but that does not necessarily make it a campaign-related expense under the applicable statute.
Hans, one last question for you. If this case, and I hope I'm not getting you to step outside of your lane too much, but if this case isn't based on campaign finance violations, what's the case that prosecutors, you believe, have here?
Well, remember, this was only one of 4 offenses that Cohen pleaded guilty to. The more serious charges were tax evasion and financial fraud in applications that he submitted to a bank. You know, he also pleaded guilty to lying to Congress. But the real offense here, the one that was most serious, was tax evasion. And that's why he was facing potentially a lot of time in jail because of that.
All right.
Rob, thank you. Exactly. I agree with you. And that was Hans A. von Spakovsky. And to my super chat, thank you so much. To the members, thank you so much. Let's go to Bradley Smith. You heard from Hans A. von Spakovsky. It's categorically, without a shadow of a doubt, not a federal crime. There is no federal crime in the jury deliberations. The FEC dropped the case. Okay. And here you're going to have yet again another example of a former Federal Election Commission chairman stating there's no federal crime. That's why these live streams are so important. I don't think anyone's really harping on this and focusing on this in the manner that I am. There's no federal crime.
So Trump's indictment looks like a perversion of campaign finance laws. There are no crimes committed, or at least that's what Bradley Smith, Capital University law professor, chairman, and founder of the Institute for Free Speech. Mr. Smith is a former FEC commissioner, and he's the co-author of Voting Rights and Election Law. Brad, you're writing in the Wall Street Journal. We've been trying to get our paws on you for the show. Thank you for coming on. You're saying there was no crime.
My pleasure.
There was no crime to start with. Even if there were some issues on the so-called filing of business papers, there was still no crime.
Right. I've had a bit more time. I had the commercial break to look at the indictment a bit more, and it looks like the last couple pages of the indictment do intend to say that the crime was not disclosing campaign contributions, although they never cite a specific government statute. But here's the problem here.
They never cited a specific government statute in the indictment, and they never cited a specific government statute with a guilty verdict. I mean, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back here because the FEC chairman have stated this for years. There was no specific statute. New York literally made up a federal crime. But this is so important. The entire planet should be talking about this.
The prosecutor's theory goes like this. Federal law says it's a campaign contribution to make an expenditure for the purpose of influencing a federal election. Those are the key words, for the purpose of influencing. And he says, well, these payments were intended to keep her quiet, which would help the campaign, so they were for the purpose of influencing the campaign. Now, first, these payments could have been made for other reasons, right? To prevent embarrassment to his family, to preserve marital harmony, all kinds of things. But none of that really matters because the standard here for the purpose of influencing is not a subjective standard. It's an objective one. So if I go out and I want to pay for TV ads that say, you know, Donald Trump is a ding-dong daddy from Dumas Bay because I think that's really going to help him win re-election, it doesn't matter. Legally, that will not be for the purpose of influencing an election, no matter what my own subjective purpose was, right? It's subjective. So what counts as campaign expenditures? Things like you don't hire a campaign manager unless you're running for office. Right. You don't take out ads saying vote for me unless you're running for office. You don't hire or establish field offices unless you're running for office. But other things you do. For example, you buy clothes whether you're running for office or not. So the fact that I'm running for office and I say, I've got to look good, and I go out and I buy a $6,000 suit that I would never otherwise buy, doesn't make it a campaign expenditure. It doesn't count. Same if I say I need a $600 haircut. Or to take a more perhaps relevant example, suppose I'm a business owner and I say I'm going to run for office and I go to my corporate lawyer and I say, there's some lawsuits against our corporation. I think they're bogus, but let's get rid of them so they don't interfere with my run. Just settle those lawsuits. You can't settle those with campaign funds. It's not a campaign expense, even though that person's subjective purpose was to influence the campaign.
By the way,
so that's a very important part of the law.
I know. I was very impressed with the $6,000 suit. That must have been a custom bespoke suit. In your op-ed piece, it was $4,000, but I know we've had an inflation problem in the last couple of weeks. But your point here, I'm just having some fun, but your point here, Brad, if I understand it, is that you buy a suit, you get a nice haircut, whatever, you're doing it directly for the campaign. Is that correct? That's the point you're making. But if you want to
the point is, yeah.
If you want to defend yourself, your honor, keep it away from your wife, that kind of thing, which, by the way, is unproven. I mean, Stormy Daniels keeps telling people she didn't have an affair. Nobody wants to listen to her, but that's perhaps grist for another segment. But if that does not qualify because it's not directly for the campaign. Is that right? Is that my correct interpretation?
It actually goes further than that. Even though you bought that suit because you were running for office and want it to look good, it's still not a campaign expenditure.
Oh.
Why? Because you buy clothes. You buy clothes whether you're running for office or not, right? And so anything that people might do, even if they're not running for office, doesn't count. So people pay money. For example, they pay divorce attorneys to try to seal up their divorce records so that those don't become an embarrassment of the campaign.
Right.
Their purpose may be to influence the campaign, but it's an expenditure that somebody who wasn't running for office might also make. The only things that count are things that come directly out of the fact that you're campaigning. And the flip side of this is that it's...
That's why the Steele dossier led to a fine. The Steele dossier was created and purchased only to ruin Trump in 2016 with lies and deception. That's why it's a campaign finance law violation. Trump would have paid Stormy at any point in time like celebrities do. Even if he paid her with his own pocketbook, it doesn't matter. Like, I think Jerry Springer paid with a with a personal check. So anyway, okay. I think he paid somebody who provided similar services with a personal check. Very, very smart. And so I believe, I'm not 100% sure. That might be apocryphal. I don't think so. But anyway, the point is, even if Trump paid with a personal check, that would not have been a campaign finance law issue.
Actually illegal to convert your campaign funds then to personal use. So it's actually illegal to use your campaign funds to buy that suit. It's illegal to use your campaign funds to pay a lawyer to seal your divorce records because you think that will help your campaign. And this is the real problem you have here. Not only is there, I think, not a campaign finance violation, this underlying alleged violation, but it's a situation where they're going to get Trump coming or going, because I think, knowing Bragg, and you've set the political stage very well, had Trump paid for this with campaign funds, I think we can feel pretty certain that he would be being charged today with having illegally converted his campaign funds to personal use. In other words, they were going to get him coming or going. If he pays for it with campaign funds, they were going to say it was illegal personal use. If he doesn't pay this money with campaign funds, which was the reality, now they say, oh, well, he should have used campaign funds. And that's, the antithesis of the rule of law, where you set up a system where no matter what course of action a person takes, they're going to be held in violation of the law.
Well, I mean, but...
Now, ladies and gentlemen, all 1,500 people watching, this is very, very important. This is exactly why the Supreme Court will overturn the case. Listen up. This is extremely important right here. There's no federal crime. And Bradley Smith says that, and he also explains a state cannot level a federal charge at a citizen without the federal government being involved. In this scenario, the federal government dropped the case.
How does that get up to the Federal Election Commission, which has already turned this case down once?
Right. Well, this raises yet another question. Can, of course, a state prosecutor prosecute an alleged, quote, federal crime that the Federal Election Commission and the Department of Justice have already decided not to prosecute? We might think about it this way. Imagine if New York just passed a law saying it is a violation of the New York Penal Code to violate any federal law. and then we'll decide what federal law is violated, right? That would subvert the entire federal state structure of law. I mean, that would allow state DAs to start prosecuting anything they think is a violation of federal law, even though the federal courts or federal administrative agencies or the Department of Justice had felt it was not a violation of federal law. So it's really getting into sort of wacky legal theories, but also I think very dangerous theories. Again, if we think about the rule of law, I don't think this can be emphasized enough that if Trump had paid for these with campaign funds, which the DA says he had to have done, I think they'd probably be chasing him today for illegal conversion of campaign funds to pay this personal expense.
We don't know that Trump paid anything to anybody.
And we don't know that Trump paid anything. There's no evidence that shows that Trump told Michael Cohen to pay. But even if he did, it wouldn't have been an issue. Let's listen to Alina Habba saying they're going to go to the Supreme Court.
Last night saying this is just, a thing, to get the statement out there. Trump's a convicted felon because they know they're going to get it overturned on appeal.
Right.
I mean, Harvey Weinstein's conviction was overturned by the New York Appeals Court, but that wasn't until 4 years later. Do you guys plan to go to as high as the Supreme Court?
If we have to, we will. We have no problem with that. As you know, we've taken those matters that we think are incredibly important to validating and preserving the Constitution that our country was made on. There were incredible constitutional violations in this whole proceeding, including the current gag order that's on me, the president, and anybody that works for him. It's crazy. So, look, if we care about America, we have to fight for it. And his legal team is prepared to do so in whatever way we need to do.
Show what Ellie Honig said, that this was a contortion and really a twisting of the law here. It was an ill-conceived, unjustified mess, this case. The critics are saying this is a political case. It would not have happened to anyone.
And then they say, look, Hunter is on trial too. Yeah, if you commit a crime. The thing with Trump is he didn't commit crimes. They've accused Trump of things he didn't do, while at the same time reacting with such indignation that they themselves would be indicted or possibly convicted in the future for criminal activity. They think everything is relative. Democrats believe the world is completely graded on a curve, a moral curve, everything's relative. So if they're indicted, Trump has to be indicted. If Trump says lock up Madam Secretary, then he needs to be locked up too. The reality is, owning private servers with top secret intelligence, you've committed a crime. Everybody knows this. James Comey knew this also. He stated there were crimes committed. But Democrats then said, oh, well, the rule of law, it's fine. No reasonable prosecutor would indict. They use their sensibilities to shield Democratic politicians from actual criminal liability. With Trump, because everything is relative with Democrats, he must be guilty of something because Trump has been accusing them of actually committed crimes, which they actually did. So therefore, Trump has to pay for the audacity, the blasphemy of accusing them of committing a crime, which with Hunter's laptop, there's bribery and graft. There's actual criminal activity. And in their world, Trump, with allegedly falsifying business records linked to an invisible federal statute that doesn't exist, that's just the same as Hunter's charge. So everything is within a warped, twisted moral universe of Democrats. Everything has to be relative because if you just grade based on a case-by-case basis, Democrats would obviously be convicted for criminal activity. Trump would not. He didn't commit a crime.
Else in America, if their name was not Trump, the danger now is the New York justice system is in the zone of having its integrity destroyed for political purposes. This case is about Biden, way behind in the polls, abusing the legal system. That top DOJ official left his powerful number 3 job in Biden's DOJ to go after Trump. In a local case with a pro-Biden judge who donated to
Let's listen to Professor Dershowitz talk about all the constitutional issues in this case.
that it was a foregone conclusion there'd be a conviction. A biased judge, a biased jury, a biased prosecutor, a man who ran for office on the theory of let's find the crime to prosecute Trump for, and they couldn't find the crime, so they made it up. We're now a day after the verdict. I've known criminal law. I've been involved in criminal law 60 years. I still don't know what the crime is.
Right.
Was he found guilty of intending to violate tax laws, to violate the federal election laws, to defraud the voters? I still don't know, and we're a day after this. This is the most outrageous case. You know, everybody knows the quote from Lavrenti Beria, the head of the KGB, and Stalin, when Beria said to Stalin,
show me the man and I'll show you the crime.
No, find you the crime.
Find you the crime. Yeah.
Tried to find the crime, and he couldn't. So he made up the crime. He took it a step further than Stalin and Lavrenti Beria. This case will go down in history as one of the most abusive prosecutions since the trial of Aaron Burr back in 18 whatever it was. This is a stain on our criminal justice
really is.
system.
And by the way, you're not the only liberal Democrat saying that. We had this interesting piece that was in the New York Magazine, of all places, by a CNN analyst, Elie Honig. I don't know if you saw it, came out this morning. He says the charge thing, none.
Is that right? But I won't say it publicly because I'm so thrilled that Trump got convicted, even though the conviction was outrageous. You get a lot of liberals who believe with Elie Honig and me that this is an unjustified conviction. We're willing to say it, but they're not willing to say it. And there's dancing on the streets, and there are people who are just...
I love Professor Dershowitz. I think he's brilliant, fantastic. But with all due respect, the reality is he's not a liberal anymore. He might be a traditional liberal Democrat, but traditional liberal Democrats don't exist anymore. The Democratic Party is a political machine. If you have to walk in lockstep with a political machine to be viewed as a liberal Democrat now. If you deviate, you're viewed as a heretic and you've committed blasphemy and heresy and you're excommunicated and you're banished from the fold. And so that's why Democrats are an actual cult. I mean, they will disown friends and family. And so to be a liberal today is to like live in this morally twisted bunker, this moral bunker, this moral, bizarre scenario where everyone is an adversary that doesn't walk in lockstep with you. So, for example, when they cheated Bernie Sanders, I was the biggest Bernie Sanders booster on the internet, according to the Huffington Post, a long time ago. Okay. I wasn't going to vote for Clinton. Oh my God, I committed heresy and blasphemy. If Trump had private servers with top secret intel, I wouldn't vote for him. If Trump had a laptop full of bribery schemes with his sons, I wouldn't vote for him. Democrats would. They don't care. So that's what it means to be a liberal Democrat nowadays. And I respect Professor Dershowitz, but he's not really the definition of a liberal Democrat today. Maybe he was in 1989, but not today.
I get these emails. They're so thrilled that we violated the Constitution in order to get Trump. I have people telling me getting Trump elected is worse than undoing the Constitution. That's how extreme some of these people are. And, it's not only this case, it's the three other cases. I go over each of them in my book, Get Trump. And every single one of them is based on conceptions that are in violation of the rule of law. This was the weakest case. This was the worst case, but it was in a very good jurisdiction.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is why the Supreme Court needs to get involved right here. The timeline, ladies and gentlemen, the timeline.
Former Manhattan DA prosecutor Elliot Feelig joins me now. Jonathan Turley, law professor, Washington University. Which university? It's Washington. George Washington University. That's the one. Well, Turley says he is convinced that the decision will be reversed, either in the state or the federal system. Do you agree with that? But more to the point, when might it be reversed?
Right. So they have a lot of significant potential appellate issues, but a couple of things. Number one, an appeal would not be heard most likely for at least a year before the intermediate appellate court hears it. And number two, politics should not play a role in these things, but we have to be cognizant of the fact that every single appellate judge in New York, both in the intermediate court and the high court, is a Democratic appointee.
Wait a second. If he runs in the election, Trump's in the election, and he loses, but then after the election, his conviction on these felony counts is reversed.
Right.
Then what?
Then there's no recourse other than too bad, so sad.
But that's outrageous.
No confidence in the judicial
system. I mean,
system
that just sinks my confidence. You're right, Lauren. That sinks my confidence in the judicial system. That's wrong.
Appeal rarely heard in less than a year, and you're talking about a voluminous transcript and so many potential appellate issues. That makes it even longer, potentially.
Now, does it have to be all 34 counts reversed?
Most likely the same issues would have impacted all of the counts. So my suspicion is that if there were a reversal, it would affect all 34 equally.
If he is sentenced to jail, I think it's July the 11th, I believe, right before the Republican convention, if he's sentenced to jail, will he actually go to jail?
They're going to sentence Trump to jail. That's why the Supreme Court, that's why, that's why I'm doing, it's very important for me to be talking about this, because if he goes to jail, his poll numbers go up, he wins in a landslide. He'll win in a landslide regardless. There's nothing stopping Trump. Biden's presidency, if you can even call it his own presidency, is an absolute unmitigated disaster. By every metric, by every standard you would judge a president. Economic, foreign policy, domestic policy, the rule of law. Democrats they're hilarious. They create this new polling issue called democracy. They cheated Bernie Sanders in their own political party. They did so every single year, so much so that they now no longer have Iowa as their first primary. I mean, all they do is lie and railroad even their own candidates. So they're the last people to talk about democracy. They've recreated a new Cold War. You'd have to be a complete imbecile to believe the Democratic Party line and propaganda on things. But they want him in jail. They want to jail the man. They want to jail Trump. The Supreme Court must get involved because it would be terrible for the country to see an innocent man who was a great president go to jail while Democrats actually commit crimes. While you have actual, Trump doesn't have a laptop full of graft and bribery. If he did, I wouldn't vote for him. If he doesn't have private servers with top secret intel, I wouldn't vote for him if he did. Okay? He doesn't have somebody like Hunter in his family possibly summarizing top secret intelligence like Ted Cruz, or classified data like Ted Cruz accused him of. If Trump had all the problems Democrats did and all the foundation with arms deals and uranium deals and all that, can you imagine if Trump presided over a uranium deal to the Kremlin? I mean, they get away with everything. And it's like with Trump, record keeping. So there's obviously a double standard. But Democrats don't care. They don't care they don't care if they look like tyrants and totalitarians and despots. They will definitely try to jail Trump, and the Supreme Court or lower courts. Look, the appeals court could expedite it. A federal court could expedite it, and it might overturn. It might be overturned before it gets to the Supreme Court, which would be I'd be just as happy. My God. But it has to be overturned before sentencing.
Well, I think he shouldn't be sentenced to jail because it's the lowest level felony in the state. He does not have a criminal record, and so it would be the exception rather than the rule to sentence someone in those circumstances to jail. But they would move for a stay of sentence pending appeal, because when you have a short jail term, you would essentially be deprived of the benefit of the appeal if you served the full term before the appeal was heard.
I think I'm following this. Convoluted legalistic logic, if you ask me. But what kind of a precedent do these guilty verdicts create?
Think of it this way. We've been having federal elections within the confines of New York State since it was founded 230 years ago. No one has ever been charged before with a business records violation arising from a federal election ever before in those 230 years.
Well, what kind of precedent does that set for elections in the future?
It makes you worry about the weaponization of the criminal justice system, and everyone should always do the shoe on the other foot test before they celebrate a verdict like that.
So this is the weaponization of the judicial system.
I think if his name were not Donald Trump, this case would never have been brought in state court.
So you can read the verdict proceedings. This is a USA Today article. You will not find a federal statute. There's no federal statute. And what can I tell you? I'll be back at 10 p.m., about 10:30 p.m. Eastern tonight, ladies and gentlemen. We will have another amazing live stream. I cannot thank all of you for being here and subscribing to my live streams. It means a great deal to me. And we are witnessing history together. We are on this journey called American history together. It sounds flowery or, prosaic or whatever, but I am really blessed and happy and just very thankful that each and every one of you are here on the live streams so we can kind of deal with this all together. We can look at what's taking place from the perspective of people who remember when times were more normal, when they were less partisan than they are today. And the reason that they are so partisan is because you have all of media, Hollywood, you had intel agencies, you have a concerted effort by a public relations and government monstrosity to take down one man. That's never happened before in American politics. You could say it has, maybe it did. But I'm talking about a concerted, prolonged effort to ruin Trump. We've never really seen this before. This is a first in American history. It's been 7 years of 24/7 apoplectic hysteria over Trump. And he's going to win. And it's a countdown, and I'm glad and I'm thankful, and God bless you. Be here every day for the countdown to November 5th and beyond on this channel. Hit subscribe. Very blessed and thankful to have each and every one of you on these live streams. To my super chat, thank you so much, members. Thank you. My Patreon will be below if you want to support this channel long term.